Hello and welcome to this webinar on why your digital customer experience story is incomplete without architecture modernization. So today's presenters are going to be Prakash Nagaswamy from Aspire Systems. He is the chief architect at Aspire Systems, and Sridhar Prabhakar, that is me. I'm a senior technical consultant at Aspire Systems again. Now, as listeners, if you have any questions, please type them in the question bar located at the bottom. We will try to answer them during the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. And if we are not able to get to the questions, all of these questions by today, we'll respond to them via email later on. So thanks for joining in. And before we start, I'd like to talk a little about Aspire. Aspire is a global technology services firm with specializations in software engineering, digital services, testing, infrastructure and application support, and product development. We also have verticals that focus on ISVs, retail, distribution, and consumer products. We have more than 1,500 employees and more than 120 active customers. We have CMMI and ISO certifications. Our international headquarters is in Singapore with presence across US, UK, Benelux, Middle East, and India. We have also been recognized 7 consecutive times as Best Place to Work by the Great Place to Work Institute. So having talked about us, today's agenda is going to be introduction to customer experience, importance of architecture modernization and CX, followed by what to modernize, the modernization components, and then we'll talk about modernization approaches. Finally, we'll talk about a sample modern architecture, and we'll take questions post that. So jumping right into the topic, what is digital CX? So just to get the definitions out of our way, let's define what CX is. CX, customer experience, is the influence on a customer when he or she interacts with any part of an organization. While digital CX is defined as CX involving the digital touch points of the organization that influence the customer's experience. Now, having said that, a customer need not always be human. It can be other digital or electronic components. So with that said, let's look at what the digital touch points are exactly in today's world. So websites, which affect a user's the user experience as such, informs them of the application's availability, service excellence, and so on. Mobile devices and applications on mobile devices, which again gives almost similar impact on customers, just like websites. Notifications. There are a lot of ways to notify customers, and a lot of them are context-based or very customized for a user. Ads, promotions, again based on a user's interests, the context, and everything. CRM tools and other systems that cater to customers and their other needs. Virtual assistants and live query management tools. Social interactions, in the sense even a Facebook page. And finally, the interesting part of it, which is the IoT interfaces, which are basically the interfaces for digital and electronic customers. So having talked about what digital CX is, let's talk about why modernization and why now. As depicted in this picture, the first and foremost reason is customer expectation, in the sense that with growing customer expectations and exposure to new and fancy applications, it is important to be in trend and in line with the modern users' expectations. So that is our primary reason. And secondly, we are also looking at improved content delivery. So we are looking at omni-channel delivery, so deliver anywhere or available anywhere on any device, context-based content identification and delivery, content enrichment based on data from several providers. And the next reason is security. Although it doesn't directly contribute to a customer experience, security is a very important aspect in modernization. With security, it of course has a hidden benefit behind customer experience. Cost, which is again very important. So to achieve a better customer experience, it is not necessary that someone has to spend too much. It can also be done in a cost-effective way. And continuity and future readiness, which is simply the fact that technology is not going to be stagnant. Technology is going to grow at an incredible pace. And because of that fact, our applications and our systems need to be in line and cope with the changes. And that is why continuity and future readiness of your application is important, which also makes sure that your customers are happy with how it progresses. Now, apart from these core reasons, we also have better decision-making capabilities because a lot of our data is available immediately and through different channels and in a very concise form. And user experience is also a primary reason, in the sense that as user experience improves, a customer's overall experience improves. So as you can see on the slide, there is a nice little infographic that talks about Gartner survey, where a lot of people who were interviewed have specified that architecture modernization of their core enterprise applications is the way to go forward. So it is not just us or you thinking that this is important. In fact, across the world, a lot of enterprises are thinking the same. And yes, that justifies our reason to modernize our architecture to improve not just our customer experience, but a lot of other factors.
Thanks, Sridhar.
Talked about, yes, yeah. Prakash. So I hand it over to Prakash.
Yeah, thanks, Sridhar, and thanks for giving an insightful, walkthrough in terms of what digital customer experience and what benefits that actually brings to the business. When you talk about customer experience in the digital world, it's not about just the pure cosmetic aspects of it, because all these things has to be thought through from the ground up. That is why when you want to talk about modernization, so you have to really understand it's not just your application has to be modernized. You have to thought through from the ground up to understand what all the various elements within your modernization aspects which is going to bring value for your customer experience. So it has to start from the way that has been operated on the process. So you have to have a very clear-cut way of thinking, and then trying to put together a new process to see how the new process would be able to bring value to your digital customer experience. So it has to start from the process and the people associated in using those processes. So you have to educate the people and make sure that the newly defined processes are well being received by the new set of people operating those processes. The second aspect is in terms of the software elements associated in your business application. So you have to bring a lot of thought in terms of how your new software components is going to bring benefits for the digital customer experience. So there is a lot of thought that has to be given in that in terms of how to provide scalability, how to bring the decomposition of, services, non-linear scaling, hybrid scaling, all those factors. So when you talk about, a business application, now there is a lot of insights or information being, operated upon. What are all the elements associated in the data architecture? So you have to bring elements of, modernization into your data architecture to address the modern world, data requirements in terms of, structured data, unstructured data, graph data, social data, all these things. And of course, enormous amount of transactional data. The third one is, once you have all these things, how do you channelize these things? How do you ensure the informations are protected? Because one of the primary concern in modern world today is, how the informations are private and secure, how the sensitive informations are protected. If you talk about a healthcare, business applications, because all informations are private and unless you authorize to somebody else. How do you bring these aspects, into your modern architecture so that these can be built from ground up? It's not just data protection. It's also about, providing a better and convenient mechanism for end user to kind of authenticate. Take an example, in the traditional world, you would have, many different sets of credentials for every other application. And of course, that is too cumbersome for, each one of us to kind of manage, which kind of, doesn't give the great opportunity for the customer experience. So of course, that's where, new modern architecture brings you the security frameworks that helps you to, kind of channelize those into a single form of authentication. And the next aspect is how these contents are being delivered in terms of, omnichannel. Because now, if you really look at it, it's not like, people just operate all this, business applications through computers. Today, you see, a whole lot of people from various, age groups who prefer to operate on certain devices. For example, if you look at the youngsters, they're all more convenient to use their tablets or smartphones. Of course, for the, the older generation, they still go with the larger, the real estate component by using a laptop or a desktop. How do you bring these elements in your modern architecture so that the entire customer base gets benefited out of this? And finally, putting all this together, you need to have the better infrastructure to handle this. In terms of, trying to host it, in terms of providing an ability for it to expand, as and when the load increases and shrink as and when the load decreases. And also an ability to kind of, weed out something which is not doing its job. So you have to look at all these aspects, before really saying, what I need to modernize it. So let's get into, some of the key aspects and trying to dive a little detail into each one of these areas and trying to provide a kind of insights so that you kind of have a better idea in terms of what it takes to modernize in each of these areas. When you talk about a software modernization, the first and foremost things that, always you look at is, how long these going to have, in the marketplace. Definitely you need to have, the ability for, plug and play kind of capabilities. The other one is, you always build for a small set of business users and have this kind of scale or a scale out model so that, you'll be able to bring the economy of scale when your business user grows. So you should be able to build an architecture which kind of scales out very well. And the next aspect you look at is, how it can learn on its own, how it can actually make a decision on its own. Traditionally, if you really look at it, the business software, there is a set of people who monitor all these things and trying to, kind of, increase the, capacity of the system or decrease the capacity of the system. Those are all the past thing, of the, traditional software, operations. In today's world, we want to build a software which is more adaptive in nature, which can understand the load, which we can actually build in the metrics and be able to kind of, decide, how it needs to grow on a demand basis and kind of shrink when the demand reduces. And the third aspect is, the reliability. So I talked about, having these softwares to be immutable, meaning if there is something wrong today, you don't have time and, the resources to go and, figure out what exactly is happening. So either you build a more, resilient software which can kind of, take out from the, the entire, operations and bring in a new set of systems. So all your system components should be kind of immutable, so that, you would be able to quickly replace the faulty ones and then move on. And of course, interoperability in terms of, working with various systems. In modern world, you would have a whole lot of, business applications, and you may not want to reinvent those wheels. So you want to kind of, tap in those capabilities and kind of coexist in the world. When you talk about coexist, not every, applications or the systems are built on the same technology. So you would have a whole lot of technology agnostics in your ecosystem and able to kind of interoperate. And of course, everything is driven towards how best it performs in the real world. So people always look at how it's going to provide me the better user response, because that one of the key measurements that people from the end user use it to measure how best the application is able to cope up with my requirements. And finally, the thought about buy versus build. Of course, you don't have to reinvent the wheel for everything from ground up, and then you will not be able to meet the business demands. So try to take out the core USP from your business part and try to provide that solution. And for the rest of the things, always try to bring the COTS component, which are readily available and be able to gel into your ecosystem. So these are all the elements typically you would look at, when you want to modernize these things. Now we talked about all these things. Now let's get into the current trends by, bringing all these aspects and see what all the trends, prevails today, and see how, we can potentially tap these things, for the modernization. And probably you would be heard about the buzz in the industry that everybody talks about microservice. And microservice is not, new to the industry. It's been there for a while, around the time when the SOA was created. The only thing is that the scale of that, the SOA with the ecosystem of service discovery dynamically and trying to bind those things existed those days. Now it is actually getting into a more refined and, kind of controlled fashion. That's the reason, today you see a lot more adoption in terms of microservice implementation than in the ages of SOA with all those discovery mechanisms. And the next thing is, you can think of how I'm going to build as a new modern architecture in terms of multi-tenant application. Because today, you would have a, business application catering to vast set of customers, from small, medium to large, and of course in terms of the total number of volumes. And managing, separate versions for each one of them is a nightmare. So that doesn't really bring the benefit to the customer experience. So the only way that business can adapt is, if they can actually unify all these customers into a single platform, or kind of provide a software as a service so that everybody gets the latest application irrespective of their size and the scale. So obviously adapting to the SaaS model will help you to bring those benefits. Of course, you don't have to get into a detailed of SaaS and say I'm going to build the highest maturity level in the SaaS product. And of course, SaaS product has various maturity levels. So you can consider and see what type of maturity model suits very well for your business application. Of course, you might try to do isolation of data for each customer, or trying to co-host some of the smaller customers, the larger customer, so that you get the benefit of better utilizing the hardware resources. And the next one is considering to use something which is readily available in the market, which we call as a platform as a service. Rather than reinventing the wheel on your own, probably leave out your non-core capabilities and then try to consume that as a platform as a service. The great examples is you could use Amazon's platform as a service for, say, a queuing service, or for a routing service, or for a load balancing service, or for a RDBMS service. So these are all the typical examples that you can think of. So that you can focus your modernization only on your core business capabilities. The next one is, again, on the similar lines, taking a step further and see, because many times, the database is not your core area of expertise. It just acts as your storage. Why can't you leverage database as a service? And, Azure as a service is a great example of that. Or DynamoDB as a service is a great example. So you can combine the, capabilities of these things and see how your modern architecture is going to evolve and see how that's going to bring the benefits for your digital customer experience. The next one is machine learning. How can my system or the business that I'm building can learn on its own? So these are all some of the aspects that actually brings the great digital touchpoint experience for the user. Take an example of Apple Siri system, which continuously learns. You cannot really have a static response and expect that people to use it very well. So that is a great example in terms of how you can build a learning system that can in itself evolve and become more smarter and intelligent. And take an example of Amazon Echo. All are all in the similar kind of leagues. So you can think of these are all the ways that probably you would have to see trying to bring benefits back to your digital experience. And real-time analytics. Of course, the analytics is the key driver for many of the decisions. Now taking a step further, and you need to have that real-time analytics. Most of the retailers used to do this and trying to create a targeted marketing campaign. And when you want to target a set of users, you have to target when they are at the store or at the place when they can actually trying to get engaged. You don't want to do it after they are leave the store or before they get into the store, because real-time analytics play a key role in that. And of course, how you bundle these, all these, business components and, trying to give it back to the end users. Of course, these are all, hidden behind for the consumer to see it, but of course, they are going to see the, the implicit benefits. For example, in the traditional model, you would have to bring, a whole lot of, physical hardwares and trying to provide all these capabilities with the vast amount of, infrastructure elements. Today, all these things can be, kind of, confined into containers wherein it is guaranteed to operate successfully. In the past, your business systems might have many dependencies, and you have to ensure your operation teams has a complete knowledge on these things. Otherwise, it's going to create a disaster for the customer experience. Today, all those risks are minimized by getting into a virtualization and containerization, wherein what exactly it's going to happen when you build the containers. So that can bundle all the required elements for your business application. So when we talked about creating an immutable system, right? Now the immutable system has a great opportunity to operate successfully rather than giving it a lower percentage. And of course, trying to get into the world of digital, and without a social, there is no digital today. In terms of getting the feeds from Facebooks, or getting a tweet from Twitter, or any other social feeds, or getting a social comments. So all these will form of your ecosystem. So you can pick and choose of these areas of architecture and see how relevant it is for your business, and be able to bring the better digital experience for your customer. The next key aspect is in terms of, I talked about the storage component. Because in the modern architecture, definitely now we are looking at as the data coming from a variety of sources. So some could be a structured data from your traditional component. Now the new thing is it could be from unstructured details coming in from various social medias. And of course, with the digital exposure to the world, Now the transactional volumes are increasing. Now more and more data, transactional information are getting into the system. So you should have an ability to handle all this, structured, unstructured, huge volume of transactions. Of course, when you talk about a huge volume of transactional data, then there is, the requirement for a distribution. Because when you want to really provide a business critical applications, that has to be always available, irrespective of where you operate your business. And the data storage forms the backbone of that. So you need to have a really, a distributed data storage mechanism across geos in order for it. And of course, when you have a large data set, you can create a lot more insights. So the data science becomes important for you in terms of, understanding the data, what it is, and able to make sense out of it, creating a nice little, infograms or infographics out of it. And of course, when you have all these things, how does the enterprise look at these data as a unified model? Because when you have all these pieces coming from as different sources, you need to have some mechanism to converge this and have a unified view. So you need to start, thinking in the form of data lakes, because data lakes allows you to have a variety of, data sources getting into a common schema. So these are all some aspects that you can actually think, why your, storage architecture becomes important in your modernization journey. Now let's look at, some of the trends or the technologies which is going to drive these things in terms of, what it's going to help. When you talk about structured and unstructured, probably you have to think of, outside of the box from your traditional relational database and see how you are going to bring in non-traditional data sources. NoSQL databases. Of course, there are plenty of options today in terms of NoSQL databases. Now we have to pick the one which is more relevant and more appropriate. When you talk of large transactional volumes, then you will have a whole set of data. Now when you kind of distribute it across, then there is a bigger problem on the clustering part, right? So when you choose a model which does the clustering in the master-slave mode, then again, you would have to bring in one more level of, the risk, wherein the master has to be, fully available. So there you are creating a bottleneck. Probably you have to start looking beyond those, master-slave model and what is, available in the market. Maybe you can look at, something like more like a peer-to-peer, replication, wherein you would be able to get the benefit through a system, where and not a single master in the system, but every node in your distributed setup will act as a master and be able to provide the source of data. So Cassandra is a great example of that. So that's the reason, there is a, place for Cassandra. And of course, that doesn't take away the old model of, master-slave mode. So you still have the, Mongo systems with the fully clustered setup as the master-slave things, and as well as distributed Cassandra setup with, many ring architectures. And of course, you can look at, the other systems as well. So these are all some of the, touch points that, just give you a hint in terms of what you can look at it. But again, these are all things you have to keep in mind when you want to really look at the benefits of customer experience. And I touched upon on the security aspects of your modernization. So the first and foremost thing is, the security of your data. So you can look at, many angles in terms of, using an infrastructure for, encrypting the data. Of course, there is a one level of encryption. But also, you have to see how those encryptions are protected. So you have to bring in the aspect of encryption to your systems. So what is a better algorithm which can provide it? Because today, everything has a risk factor associated with it. So you have to start looking at, what are the least risk factor and trying to distribute those risks. For example, storing the key and the encrypted data is always a risk. So you have to look at the ways to separate out these things. For example, if you want to hash, the hash in itself is secure, but still there are mechanisms that, you would be able to break given there is enough time. So you have to think through all these aspects and see how I can kind of, make it harder for, the people to extract the useful information. So when you are looking at the hashing, so maybe try to do the, the iterative level of hashing. And then the speed of algorithms makes a big difference in there. And also, I touched upon in terms of, having so many credentials, makes, very hard for the end user to experience the digital experience of today or the modern world. Maybe you can think of, using one of the social authentication as a factor to authenticate. So most of the providers have the OAuth as a provider. For example, Google does it and Facebook does it. And that may not be sufficient enough for you to prove the identity. So maybe you might want to bring in the multi-factor authentication. And also provide a fine-grained access. You don't want to give a blanket access even if somebody is authenticated. So you really need to segregate, based on what they want to provide as an access. So you really need to have a better authorization mechanism to support it. These are all some of the things that you would actually look at from the software world. And of course, in hardware elements, you have to see how you can, control these elements at a firewall level or a virtual private network level. So that would actually summarize in terms of what are the ways that you can actually bring out the security architecture in the modernization. Of course, when you talk about security, there is also an element of, standard compliance. So you have to make sure that, when you take, any of the modernization into your journey, try to adapt to the standard models or a standard compliance. That will help you to evolve into a industry-specific player rather than a more proprietary systems. Because then again, our objective of modernization gets defeated, if you can't continue that for a longer period of time. Now getting into the, content delivery, the first one is the omni-channel experience. So provide the appropriate content for the kind of devices that are being used and for the audience being targeted. And of course, bring the element of personalization based on, what their preferences are, and trying to provide a seamless navigation with the proper information architecture. And also about, providing a context-sensitive navigation. Because many times, the traditional model creates all the great, navigation tool, but that doesn't bring the context. Now, talking of the context, the new iOS software is a great example of, context-sensitive things. So now the new 3D touch capability is a great example for, the context-sensitive, wherein according to the context you are operating upon, that provides you an option. This is a similar kind of experience you want to actually provide it to the end user. And of course, trying to integrate all the social content so that the content architecture kind of gives the entire gamut of, personalization, the context-sensitive data presentation, as well as omni-channel delivery and the social inputs. So finally, with all of these things, without talking about the hardware and the infrastructure, doesn't get completed. So when you bring all these elements, now the bigger question is, how do I, make sure all these things are bundled and, kind of deployed and kind of provide the capability what the modern digital experience can provide to the end user. The first thing is, how you bundle these and how do you, encapsulate these things. So you had to look at the virtualization and make sure all your resources are properly accounted for. And apart from virtualization, you would also try to accommodate the containerization so that the single unit of immutable component that you're building and which has higher percentage of success. And rolling out of all these changes into the user system or the production system requires a lot of operational details, which brings you the DevOps component, where how do you bring the CI/CD into your fold? How do you ensure these softwares are released to the customer seamlessly? How does it get transitioned from dev to the production system in a controlled fashion? And once it is deployed, how does these softwares get a kind of a scaled based on the load factor and kind of expands and shrinks? You really don't want to manually operate on these aspects. So you have to build a system in such a way that it can adapt and operate on its own. So you need to have a proper mechanism to monitor and kind of operate upon or decide upon these factors. So you need to have a good monitoring and the decision-making capability within your infrastructure to do that. So when you combine all these things, and definitely, your modernization aspects would bring the, better of digital world experience for the end users. So this kind of, gives you a holistic view of, what are the things that you have to look at in terms of, when you think of modernization, not just, cosmetic aspects, but getting into, detail right from the process to the deployment aspects of it. Now we have seen the gamut from the process to the deployment. Now let's take a look at the actual sample architecture, which kinds of gives you all this, insights what we talked about. So my colleague Sridhar would walk you through those details.
Thanks, Prakash. So what we have in front of us is a sample modern architecture, as we would want to call it. As a disclaimer, this is not the only way to do it. Of course, there could be other ways to do it. There definitely are other ways to do it. But what we've proposed here is done in consideration of everything that we've talked for the past half an hour. So this architecture, because of space constraints and so many other things, does not include certain aspects of it, in the sense that it does not talk about deployment. It does not talk about deployment entirely, but it does talk about it in a smaller fashion. So let's dive into it and see what we have here. So this implementation is a microservices implementation where all clients, your browsers, mobile phones, IoT devices, and everything that can be considered a client goes through an API gateway or a service gateway to access any service within the application. And this API gateway internally uses a service discovery or registry service, discovery or a register service, which registers every version of every service that goes up and also monitors their health. So as and when services go down, the registry gets to know of them and keeps a tab on them. Now, the API gateway again routes all requests through a security layer, which does authentication, authorization, session management, and all of it. And once it clears the security layer, it is passed on to the actual services. Now, if you look at each of these services in detail, you'd see that there are multiple versions of the same service hosted parallelly. Because when we talk about replaceability and upgrades, it is imperative that there are some devices that are resistant to upgrades as such. So some of your clients may still be using version 1 while you've upgraded to version 2. So it is important for us to add support to our older clients while upgrading as and when needed. Now, obviously, the usage of services as we upgrade needs to be monitored and scaled depending on usage. So as clients keep upgrading, your older versions will be scaled out and slowly removed from the whole offering. Now, apart from the core services or the business services in this picture, there are also supporting services. Some of them include the identity service, which in itself is an auto-scaled self-managed service. There are notification services. There are monitoring services, which internally monitor its own status and also the other services status. And based on their usage statistics, based on thresholds that are set, they can be auto-scaled and new machines spawned as and when needed. Now, with these support services, these support services are to sustain and manage the whole ecosystem. and keep it alive for any load. And as you can see here, this architecture is built for nonlinear scaling. And given this architecture, we propose that it is possible to handle a very large load. Now, we've still not gone to how your data is distributed in across regions and how you store data actually. So, at the bottommost layer as such is the distributed data store, where your databases can be across multiple regions, and each region can have structured, unstructured, or any other form of data store, in the sense any other form of data storage. So file servers, graph databases, or LDAP servers, or whatever it can be. So when we distribute a data source, it also becomes important that we build intelligence out of it, because it is not always apparent when it is distributed. And so we have a business intelligence or analytics platform or a service that is separately operating and connects to all of these data sources, and which in turn does reporting. For communication between services, there are orchestration services which can handle workflows between services and even between third-party services. So now we've defined what we think is a modernized architecture, but of course we are open to questions. We can definitely take them as they come up. So for now, we'll go on to the next section, and we'll take the questions at the end of this session. So typically, architecture modernization approaches, in most cases, people have applications that are ready and running and live, in which cases it is not always possible for people to build from ground up. So if a new product is being built, it can be built from ground up. We can build the core services first and then build each of the services separately. But that is not always the approach, or that is not always possible for businesses that are already live and running. So that is where incremental modernization comes into picture. So here we propose two different ways of doing it. One of them is to build the core services first, isolate services from your existing application, and plug it into the core service. So that way you have your ecosystem built first, and then it makes it easy for you to isolate services slowly as and when you have time and budget, and plug it into the core framework. So that is our first approach. The second one is a pilot-based rollout, in which the approach is slightly different, in the sense we identify and isolate services first, and then build the ecosystem as and when the service is needed. So let's say we move out just the search feature of an e-commerce application out. It might require an identity service, so we build only that identity service first, and then slowly, as we pull out and isolate services, we build the ecosystem along with the services. So these are very standard techniques, I believe, which people can use to modernize, and so that's what we propose to. And in fact, we would ideally want to use the first approach, where we build the core service first, but to define that in a step-by-step approach, what one should do is, initially, as soon as you have the application that is running already, identify each and every business function of your application and create them as a service, if they're not already exposed as services, because you would want to enable multiple clients to be able to access that service. So given that as a future upgrade, we want all of them to be services. And so as you create services, we also create core services parallelly. And as we move one by one, we would recommend each of these isolated service to use the core service for orchestration, authentication, identity, and everything. So that way, you slowly migrate out of your current existing architecture and move on to a modern framework. So that is all from us today. We are free to take up any questions now. And thanks for listening in.
Thank you, Sridhar. And we have a question from one of the audience. Says, how do I choose the right architecture for my modernization? And of course, there are multiple ways to look at it. One is, when you say, right architecture for modernization, that means you already have an existing application or an ecosystem. So that given said, the approaches should be one of the ones which we talked about from the last slide, where it is an incremental modernization or the pilot-based approach. Now you really don't want to cannibalize, your existing infrastructure, and you have to seamlessly transition from your old application into a new modern architecture. So what you should look at is you should look at the key segments and see how I can kind of decompose these from my existing system and build these capabilities as a newer system. When you want to build this as a piecemeal, the right kind of model is, maybe bring in the microservices architecture. Because now you are no longer building a big monolithic capabilities with all these new fancy things, right? Now we have a single objective where I want to, bring these functionality or these capabilities. The only thing is, you need to have your, the existing infrastructure modernize a bit to be able to use the current element of your software and also the newer services being built from the microservices paradigm. So what you should do is, you should identify or prioritize the key services or the core services, how you want to bring those things into your modern architecture, or which are all the capabilities that would actually bring the better customer experience for the end user. Maybe it could be just handling apart from the structured data, non-structured data, or it could be just providing a real-time analytics, or it could be just one experience. I can talk about is the retailers. Okay, you want to have the single factor as trying to optimize the cost so that I can actually provide better user experience to the consumers, or bring the biometric authentication into your folds. So what you should look at is all these things you should prioritize, okay, and pick these key areas and then start detailing out as a microservice. Then look at your current ecosystem and see how you are going to consume your the new microservice from your existing application. And then slowly it's like take your entire car and slowly start replacing the key logical components. Of course, you cannot just replace each nuts and bolts, but as a whole, for example, instead of a V4 engine, you should be able to replace the V6 engine. So that is the kind of approach we would recommend for a new modern architecture.
Yes, Prakash, there is also another question on what technologies do we recommend for building microservices.
Okay. Thanks, Sridhar. So in terms of choosing the technology, again, that depends on what architecture you choose it. And of course, today there are many out-of-the-box frameworks readily available, whichever the technology that your organization is already aligned to, you would start looking at and see what all the libraries available in there. Some popular things which I can talk about is on the Java world, wherein the Spring provides, the Spring community provides a great set of frameworks for getting started with the microservice implementation. And of course, Netflix contributed many of those things into an open source from their own implementation. And of course, there are some elements from the Apache would also be part of it. So there is a combination you could use it. For example, you can use a Spring Cloud bundle, which can bring in the Netflix OSS system that can provide you all the reverse proxy capabilities, load balancing capabilities for your microservice, and maybe help you on the circuit breaker capabilities. And of course, there are some code generation tools are also available. If you are just Spring and Angular kind of application, probably you can look at something like a JHipster that kind of provides a scaffolding which would help you to create on a Spring-based backend and the Angular-based frontend for the microservice frameworks. Of course, that's on the Java world. And onto the open source world, probably you can look at some of the newer PHP libraries like Lumen provides you the great microservice. So these are all something that you can start leveraging as the frameworks or the libraries to get started on your microservice implementation.
Okay, I guess we can wait for a couple more minutes for any further questions. Or you can always write to us. Our email address is right at the bottom. You can always write to us and we'll make sure we will get back to you. Thanks for listening in. We are available for you for any questions that you have. Thank you.
And thanks everyone for dialing into this webinar. And of course, this is a tip of the iceberg in terms of your modernization journey. So what we try to give was, just to give a hint of what are the things that you need to look at in terms of, bringing the better digital customer experience. Of course, it depends on your business context as well as your business application needs. So please do write to us in terms of if you have any further questions after this webinar ends. Thank you.
Thank you.